The first thing I noticed wasn't fear. It was silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles after a long day, but the kind that feels arranged. Like someone had stepped into my life and carefully turned the volume down without asking. I stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the other inside my handbag, fingers searching where memory insisted something should be. Leather, glass, cold metal. Instead, my hand brushed against nothing but a crumpled receipt and a peppermint candy, sticky from heat. My phone was gone. I searched again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if patience might make it appear. But patience has limits even at 78. My wallet wasn't there either. Neither were my glasses. A strange calm settled over me, heavy and slow, pressing against my ribs. At my age, panic rarely arrives first. Panic is for people who still believe the world will pause for them. What arrived instead was recognition. The quiet understanding that something had already happened, and I was late to it. Without my glasses, the room softened into smears of color. The kitchen table leaned slightly to the left, or maybe my balance did. I couldn't be sure. I reached for the chair and lowered myself down carefully, heart beating louder than it should. They had been here. I didn't need clear sight to know that. The lamp on the side table faced the wrong direction. The curtains were drawn halfway closed, though I never did that during the day. And my blue notebook, the one I kept beside the phone, the one where I wrote things I refused to forget, was gone. That was when the quiet turned sharp. Daniel's face surfaced in my mind without effort. The way he hugged me earlier, too long, too tight. His voice had been gentle, practiced. Aunt Margaret, you shouldn't be handling the harder stuff anymore. Harder stuff. He'd meant my mail, my accounts, my decisions. I had smiled then. Smiles are easy when you've spent a lifetime smoothing things over. Now, sitting alone in a house that no longer felt entirely mine, the smile felt like a mistake. Footsteps crunched outside. Gravel. A car door slammed. My stomach tightened as if my body had arrived at the truth seconds before my mind allowed it. The front door rattled. Once. Twice. Then it opened. "We're back," Daniel's voice called, too cheerful, too quick. "We need to talk." Kira stepped inside first, her shape a dark blur against the doorway. "You're coming with us for a few days," she said lightly, as if suggesting a weekend trip. "You've been confused lately." Confused. Such a useful word. It explains everything without explaining anything at all. Daniel closed the door behind him. The click echoed louder than it should have. "We'll explain in the car," he said. "You'll feel better once you're settled." Settled. I understood then, without panic, without shouting, that this wasn't concern. It was removal. As Daniel reached for my arm, guiding me toward the door with practiced gentleness, something inside me cooled and hardened into clarity. They had taken my phone. They had taken my wallet. They had taken my glasses. But they had forgotten one thing. And as I stepped outside into the fading light, nearly blind but suddenly awake, I realized this moment, this quiet, careful moment, was only the beginning. Because whatever they thought they were taking from me, they had no idea what I still carried. Why would family return an hour after leaving, unless they were afraid of what I might discover? The car smelled unfamiliar. Not dirty. Not unpleasant. Just wrong, as if the air itself didn't belong to me. Lavender hung too heavy in the back seat, sweet enough to sting the back of my throat. Kira's perfume. I'd given it to her years ago for her birthday. A small bottle. I remember thinking it was too strong for my taste. Now it felt like a warning. Daniel's hand hovered at my elbow as I slid into the seat. Not helping, guiding. Steering. He buckled my seatbelt before I could reach for it myself. The click echoed loud in my ears, final in a way seatbelts never are. "Comfortable?" he asked. I nodded because nodding required less effort than arguing. Because arguing too early teaches people where your strength is. And because something told me to watch first. To listen. The engine started. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the car rolled backward, away from my house. My house. The word landed heavy in my chest as the shape of it dissolved into a gray blur through the window. No neighbors outside. No passing cars. Just perfect timing. I folded my hands in my lap to hide the shaking in my fingers. Fear was finally arriving now, creeping in like cold through thin fabric. But beneath it was something steadier, anger maybe, or instinct. The kind that whispers, pay attention instead of run. Where are we going? I asked softly. Daniel didn't answer right away. He adjusted the radio instead, lowering the volume until the music became nothing more than background breathing. You need rest, he said finally. Some peace and quiet. You've been overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Another word designed to shrink a person without ever touching them. I wasn't overwhelmed, I said. I was missing things. Kira laughed, light and dismissive. Everyone misplaces things sometimes, especially when they're stressed. I turned my head toward the window. Trees streaked past, indistinct and rushing. I knew this road even without seeing it clearly. My husband and I had driven it dozens of times. Picnics, long conversations, quiet days when the world felt too loud and this stretch of land softened everything. Now it carried me somewhere without my consent. Daniel's voice lowered. You've been making calls, Aunt Margaret, asking questions that don't make sense. It worried us. Which questions? I asked. Silence. Not the thoughtful kind, the instructive kind. The road curved. The hum of tires changed. The houses thinned out. I knew then we were going east. Kira's hand settled lightly on my forearm. The touch was gentle, rehearsed. Just relax. Once we get there, you won't have to worry about phones or wallets or paperwork. We'll handle it. Handle it. I tasted something bitter rise in my throat. So you did take them, I said quietly. Daniel sighed, like a man exhausted by someone else's misunderstanding. We secured them. You've been anxious lately. I wasn't anxious, I replied. I was aware. The word seemed to irritate him. His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. The car drove on. The further we went, the quieter the world became. No storefronts. No sidewalks. Just trees, sky, and the steady pull of distance. I realized something then that chilled me more than fear ever could. They had chosen this moment carefully. A weekday. Early evening. No one around to notice an elderly woman being escorted away like a fragile object. They hadn't rushed. They had planned. My hands curled tighter in my lap. My body felt heavier with every mile. Not from age, but from understanding. This wasn't about helping me rest. This was about removing me from my routines, my memory anchors, my voice. The car slowed. Gravel again. Wind brushing through tall pines. Daniel turned off the engine. We're here, he said. The door opened and cool air rushed in, sharp and pine-scented. The smell carried memories that didn't belong in this moment. Laughter. Coffee on a porch. Summer evenings. Not this. Not now. As Daniel helped me out, gripping my elbow a little too firmly, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Uneven. Unforgiving. Careful, he murmured. See? This is why you need us. I looked up at the dark shape of the cabin ahead. A structure I recognized but didn't fully understand yet. It loomed against the dim sky, quiet and waiting. They led me inside. The door closed behind us with a soft, deliberate sound. And in that moment, standing in a place meant for rest but filled with intention, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. They didn't bring me here to help me. They brought me here so I couldn't help myself. If this place was meant to keep me safe, why did it already feel like something was being taken from me? The cabin smelled like dust and old summers. Pine resin, stale wood. A faint trace of charcoal from a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. It should have felt familiar. Comforting even. Instead, the air felt prepared. Cleaned too carefully, arranged too thoughtfully, like a stage waiting for actors who already knew their lines. Daniel reached for a lamp and turned it on. The light didn't help much without my glasses. It only sharpened the blur, turning furniture into shadows with intention. But even through the fog, I could tell something was wrong. The chairs were closer together than they used to be. The table had been pushed against the wall. The rug's gone. Safer this way, Kira said, following my gaze. So you don't trip. Safer. Another word dressed up to look kind. My bag sat neatly by the sofa. My bag. Packed without my knowledge. Folded clothes I didn't choose. Toiletries I didn't ask for. And when Kira unzipped the side pocket and handed me a small plastic bottle, my chest tightened. Your medication, she said. We brought enough for a few days. I keep my medication locked, I replied. Daniel cleared his throat. We found the key. Of course they did. I lowered myself onto the sofa, feeling the springs groan beneath me. The sound felt louder than it should have, as if the cabin itself were paying attention. Daniel sat across from me, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced. He wore the same expression he used when he wanted to appear reasonable, calm, concerned, practiced. We've been worried for a while, he began. You've been forgetting things. I haven't forgotten anything, I said. Kira smiled. Not unkindly, not warmly either. It's hard to notice changes in yourself. That sentence landed like a stone in still water. I notice my documents moving, I said. I noticed my notebook disappearing. I noticed you standing by the drawer where I keep my bank records. Kira laughed softly. You're misremembering. There it was. The line they'd been waiting to use. Daniel leaned forward. We spoke to someone. Just informally. A lawyer. He said it might be best if someone responsible helped manage things for a while. Responsible. Manage. For a while. Words designed to sound temporary while erasing permanence. What things? I asked. Our finances, Daniel corrected quickly. Your finances. Insurance. Property. There are updates needed. Updates. Another harmless word hiding sharp edges. I folded my hands in my lap and felt my pulse thudding there. Why did you take my phone? So you wouldn't stress, Kira replied smoothly. You call too many people. And my wallet? You lose things. And my glasses? A pause. You dropped them earlier, she said. I didn't, I replied. Daniel exhaled slowly. Margaret, you don't remember everything anymore. The sentence was gentle. The implication was violent. I understood then how this worked. If they convinced me I was confused, every action of theirs became protection. Every theft became safety. Every decision made without me became necessary. Daniel stood. You're tired. We'll talk more in the morning. He walked to the window and drew the curtains closed. The room dimmed. You'll stay inside tonight, he said casually. The woods can be dangerous. No phone. No glasses. No light except the lamp he controlled. Kira picked up her coat. We'll be back early. Don't wander around. They didn't ask if I needed anything. They didn't say goodnight. The door closed behind them with a soft final click. The sound lingered in the air long after their footsteps faded. I sat there in the dim light, alone, listening to the quiet settle around me like a weight. My hands trembled now. Not from fear exactly, but from clarity. This wasn't neglect. This was a strategy. They weren't trying to help me rest. They were trying to weaken me, to confuse me, to make me doubt myself long enough to sign something I shouldn't. I stood slowly, testing my balance, memorizing the shape of the room through touch and shadow. The sofa, the table, the wall. They had taken what I relied on, but they had underestimated something far more dangerous than sight or memory. They had underestimated patience. And as I stood there in the quiet cabin, planning my next move one careful breath at a time, I realized something else. This place wasn't chosen at random, which meant whatever they intended to take from me hadn't even started yet. Why did they need me isolated here, far from home, before asking for anything at all? The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watchful. I sat on the sofa long after Daniel and Kira left, listening to the cabin breathe. Wood expanded and settled. Wind brushed against the walls. Somewhere outside, something small moved through the leaves. Every sound felt louder when there was no one to witness it but me. I stood slowly, careful not to rush my body into a mistake. Without my glasses, depth was unreliable. Distance lied. I learned long ago not to fight my limitations but to work with them. I reached out, palm open, letting the room come to me instead of the other way around. The floorboards told stories if you listened. One creaked near the table. Another dipped slightly by the wall. Familiar weaknesses. I traced them with my feet, memorizing each one. This wasn't wandering. This was mapping. They thought taking my phone would silence me. They thought taking my glasses would slow me. They thought taking my wallet would erase my authority. But they hadn't taken my memory. And they hadn't taken my hands. I moved toward the door. The handle turned, but the deadbolt didn't budge. New. Solid. installed by someone who didn't want surprises. I tried the windows next, one by one. Each latch was tight, deliberate. No rest. No give. Someone had prepared this place not for comfort, but for containment. I breathed slowly, forcing my chest to loosen. Panic would cloud what patience could solve. Back near the far wall, I felt a faint draft near the floor. Barely noticeable but real. Cold air sliding where it shouldn't. I knelt carefully, knees protesting, and ran my fingers along the baseboard until I found it. A vent. Old metal. Loose screws. One already wobbling beneath my touch. Arthur's voice drifted into my thoughts without invitation. Old things always fail where people stop looking. I didn't touch it yet. Not fully. Instead, I stood and walked the room again. Slower this time. Letting every object introduce itself. The cupboard. The broom. The small storage door I remembered from years ago. I wasn't escaping tonight. Not yet. Tonight was for understanding the cage. I returned to the sofa and sat with my hands folded, forcing myself to breathe evenly. They expected me to sleep, to shrink, to wait confused and grateful. Tomorrow would come with smiles and papers. But tonight something else arrived. Resolve. They had chosen isolation because they believed it would erase my confidence. But isolation also removes distractions. It sharpens focus. It reminds you of who you were before people started deciding things for you. I thought of all the times I'd been underestimated in my life. As a young woman, as a widow, as an aging aunt. People always assume quiet means weak. They forget that quiet is where planning happens. I leaned back and closed my eyes, not to rest but to think, to gather threads, to remember small things, old habits, hidden contingencies, things Arthur insisted on just in case. The cabin was meant to make me smaller. Instead, it gave me space to remember exactly who I was. And as the night deepened outside the windows, I made one decision clear to myself. I would not sign anything. I would not comply quietly. And whatever they believed they were about to take from me, they would have to work much harder than they planned. What contingency had my late husband insisted on? One they never knew existed. And how close was I to reaching it? Night didn't fall all at once. It crept in slowly, like it was afraid to disturb me. The light outside the cabin thinned, turning the windows into pale mirrors that reflected nothing back but my own vague outline. I stood near the wall, listening to the wood settle. Somewhere a branch snapped. Somewhere else wind slid through pine needles like fingers through paper. Daniel wouldn't come back tonight. Not yet. People like him prefer daylight for difficult conversations. Daylight makes lies sound reasonable. Makes control look like concern. That meant I had one night. One stretch of darkness where expectation loosened and vigilance thinned. I returned to the vent and crouched again, my knees stiff, my hands steadier than I expected. The screw turned easily now, loosening with a soft scrape that made my breath catch. I froze, counting silently, listening for engines, for voices. Nothing. I worked slower after that. Patient. Methodical. One screw, then another. Old metal gave way to older neglect. The cover shifted under my fingers. Behind it, space. Not much. Just enough. I lay flat on the floor, cheek pressed against the cold wood, and slid my arm inside. Dust coated my skin. Cobwebs clung to my wrist. The smell was different back there. Damp, forgotten, untouched. Storage. Arthur had always kept things here. Things he didn't want to throw away because they might matter someday. I used to tease him for it. My fingers brushed something solid. Wooden crate. My heart thudded once, hard enough to make me pause. I reached again, carefully feeling inside. Metal. Rough rope. Something thin and hooked. Tools. I pulled them closer inch by inch, the scrape of old wood sounding thunderous in my ears. When I finally drew them into the cabin, I sat back against the wall, chest heaving quietly. They had cleaned the cabin, but they hadn't known how to clean it. I wrapped the rope loosely around my hand, testing its strength. Aged but intact. I lifted the hook, feeling its weight. Simple. Useful. Honest. Not weapons. Options. That was when pain flared in my knee, sharp and sudden. I sucked in a breath, gripping the floor until it passed. Age doesn't ask permission. It collects its price whether you're ready or not. I waited until the ache dulled. Waiting had always been something I was good at. I stood and moved toward the back of the cabin, guided by memory and touch. The storage room door was exactly where I remembered. Narrow, easily overlooked. I opened it slowly. The air inside was colder. And there it was, the small high window at the far end. The one Arthur used to curse because it never latched properly in winter. I reached up. My fingers found the frame. Then the latch. Loose. Not broken. Just old. A quiet laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not joy. Recognition. I wasn't imagining things. The world still had cracks in it. I didn't open the window yet. Not fully. That would come later. I stepped back, heart pounding, mind racing ahead of my body. This wasn't just escape. This was timing. If I left too soon, they'd notice. If I waited too long, morning would arrive with papers and pressure and polite voices explaining why resistance was pointless. I returned to the main room and sat down hard on the sofa, exhaustion flooding me all at once. My hands shook now, not from fear, but from effort. Outside, the woods whispered. Inside, the cabin waited. They thought this place would make me compliant. They were wrong. But escape would cost me something. Strength, pain, risk. And as I sat there in the half-dark, clutching old rope and borrowed hope, I asked myself the only question that mattered now. Was I willing to pay it? If freedom meant pushing my body past its limits, would I survive the attempt? Or lose everything by trying? I waited until the cabin stopped sounding like a place and started sounding like a body at rest. There's a moment at night, usually just after the last bird settles and before the wind decides which direction it prefers, when the world goes quiet in a different way. Not asleep, just inattentive. That was my moment. I wrapped the rope around my forearm, slow and careful, and tucked the hook into the pocket of my cardigan. The screwdriver I slipped into my waistband, the cool metal pressing reassuringly against my skin. Not a weapon. A promise that I wouldn't be empty-handed. Every movement hurt now. My knees complained loudly. My lower back sent sharp reminders of years spent lifting groceries, carrying laundry, bending for others. I welcomed the pain. Pain meant I was still moving. I returned to the storage room and closed the door behind me. Not fully, just enough to muffle sound. The window loomed above me like a dark suggestion. I pulled the rope free, looped it around the lower frame, and tested it with a gentle tug. It held. Barely. I paused, one hand braced against the wall, and closed my eyes. This wasn't bravery. This was necessity. I pulled myself upward slowly, muscles screaming as I reached for the frame. My foot slipped once, scraping against the wall. I froze, heart hammering, waiting for the sound of an engine, a door, a voice calling my name. Nothing. The night kept my secret. I pushed again, harder this time. My shoulder scraped the sill, sending a sharp line of pain down my arm. I bit down on my lip to keep from gasping. Blood bloomed warm against my mouth. Then air. Cool night air brushed my face, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. Freedom had a scent. I'd forgotten that. I shifted my weight, inch by inch, until my torso slid through the opening. My ribs protested. My hips nearly stopped me altogether. I whispered a quiet apology to my body and forced myself forward. Then my foot found ground. Soft soil. Leaves. Real earth. I stood there for a second, swaying, one hand pressed flat against the cabin wall. The structure loomed behind me, dark and silent, already beginning to look like a place I'd survived rather than a place that owned me. The woods stretched ahead, blurry, uneven, familiar in a way only memory can be. I tightened my cardigan and took my first step into the trees. The path wasn't marked anymore, but my feet remembered it. A dip here. A slope there. The old birch tree Arthur once carved our initials into. Now just a darker shadow among shadows. I stumbled once, catching myself against a trunk. My breath came fast, shallow. Panic nipped at the edges of my thoughts. Not now, I told myself. Not here. I moved slower after that. Careful. Listening with my whole body. Every crack of a twig sounded like accusation. Every gust of wind felt like pursuit. Time stretched strangely in the woods. Minutes felt like hours. My legs burned. My chest ached. More than once I considered stopping. Just for a moment. Leaning against a tree and letting the night decide what happened next. But then I thought of the morning. Of Daniel's smile. Of the papers. of the quiet way my life would be rearranged if I stayed. So I kept going. When the trees finally thinned and the ground leveled out, I nearly cried from relief. Ahead of me, faint but unmistakable, was the road, a pale ribbon cutting through darkness. And beyond that, somewhere past the bend I couldn't quite see, was home. I stepped onto the road, my shoes crunching softly, and followed it the only way I knew how, by faith, by memory, by stubborn refusal to disappear quietly. Behind me, far in the distance, an engine roared to life. I didn't turn around. I couldn't afford to. Was I racing toward safety, or had they already realized I was gone? The road felt endless, even though I had walked it 100 times in my life. Each step sent a dull shock up my legs, rattling bones that had already done more than their share of living. My breath burned cold in my chest. The night pressed in from all sides, and without my glasses the world narrowed to sound and instinct. Behind me the engine grew louder. Not close yet, but deliberate. They had noticed. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who panicked easily. He preferred control. Preferred arriving when everything was already decided. But I had broken the pattern. And men like him don't forgive that quickly. I moved faster than I should have. Pain bloomed sharp and unforgiving in my knee, but I welcomed it. Pain meant motion. Motion meant choice. Then, through the blur ahead, I saw it. My house. Not clearly. Not sharply. But unmistakably mine. The porch light glowed like a steady heartbeat. The outline of the roof sat exactly where memory insisted it would. The railing Arthur had replaced himself caught the faint wash of moonlight. Something inside me cracked open. I didn't stop moving until my hand hit the porch post, until my body sagged forward and I had to grip the railing to stay upright. My lungs pulled air greedily. My vision swam. Home. The word didn't feel sentimental. It felt earned. I fumbled for the door, my fingers trembling as they found the familiar grooves of the handle. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me not with silence but recognition. Every sound, the soft tick of the clock, the faint hum inside the walls, felt like a hand on my back saying, "You made it." I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. My feet knew the path. Down the hallway, past the small table, into the living room. The mantel waited where it always had. Arthur's voice echoed in my mind, steady and patient, from years ago. "If you ever feel unsafe, Maggie, really unsafe, you don't need a phone. You don't need to see. You just need to speak." My hand found the exact spot. Warm wood. Smooth from years of touch. I leaned in close, breath shaking, voice low but clear. "Emergency command," I whispered. "Margaret Holt. Priority 1. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a faint click inside the wall. So soft it could have been mistaken for imagination. But I knew that sound. The house had heard me. The system Arthur insisted on, one I'd rolled my eyes at, practiced begrudgingly, forgotten until tonight, was awake. A silent line, hidden from anyone who didn't know exactly where to speak, exactly what to say. It didn't ring. It didn't light up. It acted. Somewhere, far beyond the walls of my living room, alarms were quietly rearranging reality. Accounts flagging. Calls dispatching. Records unlocking themselves like doors finally opening. I sank into the armchair, my legs giving out beneath me. Outside, headlights washed across the front window. Daniel's car screeched to a stop. The front door flew open. "Aunt Margaret." His voice cut through the house, sharp now, stripped of softness. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. Footsteps rushed across the floor. He appeared in the doorway, chest heaving, eyes wild. Not with concern but with fear. Real fear. "What did you do?" he demanded. I looked at him through the blur, seeing him more clearly than I ever had before. "I spoke," I said quietly. His gaze flicked toward the walls, the ceiling, the old landline base he never thought to remove. The faint hum beneath the floorboards deepened just slightly. "No," he muttered. "You wouldn't know how." "I know my own house," I interrupted. For the first time, Daniel had no script. The porch creaked again. Another car. Then another. Voices outside. Calm. Professional. Daniel backed up one step, then another. And as the knock came firm, final, I understood something that settled deep in my bones. The opening moment. The silence. The missing phone, wallet, glasses. It was never the end of my voice. It was the moment I remembered where my real power lived. What consequences were already in motion, and who else would finally learn what Daniel had been trying to hide. The knock at the door was not loud. Didn't need to be. It carried certainty, the kind that doesn't ask permission and doesn't explain itself twice. Daniel didn't move at first. He stood there in the middle of my living room, shoulders stiff, breath shallow, as if his body hadn't yet caught up with the fact that the story he was telling himself was over. The knock came again. "Mr. Daniel Holt?" A voice called from outside. "Calm. Neutral. Official. We need to speak with you." I stayed in the armchair. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't need to stand to be powerful anymore. Daniel turned toward me slowly. His face looked different now. Smaller. The confidence that had carried him through conversations, through paperwork, through quiet manipulation had evaporated. What remained was something naked and scrambling. "You planned this," he said hoarsely. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I prepared. There's a difference." The door opened. 2 officers stepped inside, followed by a woman in a dark coat holding a tablet close to her chest. Her eyes met mine briefly. Not with pity, not with surprise, but recognition. "Mrs. Holt," she said gently. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes," I answered. And for the first time in days, the word didn't feel like a hope. Felt like a fact. Daniel tried to speak. Tried to explain. Tried to shape the moment into something softer than it was. But the house had already done its work. The quiet system Arthur built, the one I never fully understood until tonight, had made sure of that. Calls had been placed. Records unlocked. Documents time-stamped and sent. Everything Daniel thought he was doing slowly had been happening very quickly, just not in his favor. They asked me questions. Simple ones. Clear ones. Ones that didn't twist my words or doubt my memory. I answered them honestly. Carefully. Fully. When they led Daniel away, he didn't look back. Kira arrived later. Her tears came fast and loud, spilling apologies that felt more like panic than regret. I listened without interrupting, then asked her to leave. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When the house finally grew quiet again, it was a different kind of silence than the one that opened this story. This silence didn't erase me. It held me. I walked slowly through each room, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of door frames, grounding myself in what was real. The phone sat back where it belonged. My wallet rested in the drawer. My glasses lay folded on the table, waiting patiently. I put them on. The world sharpened. Not just visually, but emotionally. I saw my reflection in the mirror near the hallway. Older. Yes. Tired. Certainly. But not broken. Not gone. Not something to be managed quietly out of existence. Arthur used to say something that annoyed me at the time. "People think strength disappears with age," he'd say. But it doesn't. It just learns when to be quiet and when to speak. The opening moment, the helplessness, the isolation, the things taken from me was never about my decline. It was about someone else's greed. And the ending was never about revenge. It was about remembrance. Of who I am. Of what I built. Of the fact that dignity doesn't fade, it waits. I sat back down in my armchair as dawn began to soften the windows, the first light of morning creeping in without permission. For the first time in a long while, I felt something steady settle in my chest. Peace. Not because everything was easy now, but because everything was honest. And if there's one thing I want remembered from this story, it's this. Growing older does not mean growing invisible. Being quiet does not mean being powerless. And even when everything you rely on is taken away, your voice is still yours. If you remember where to find it, never mistake silence for surrender. True strength often waits quietly, until the moment it's needed most.